Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council meeting on August 18th. And I'm glad to see everybody here in the middle of a beautiful Vermont summer. Thanks for joining. We're going to begin. I'm going to just kind of walk through what we're trying to accomplish tonight, and then ask for two things. One, to ensure that the minutes that you received look okay and acceptable. And I'm also going to offer the great, wonderful, exciting opportunity to take notes. So every night, every time we meet, we're going to have to rotate that. So I'm giving you a minute to think about what an incredible opportunity that would be for you. So we're going to hear some updates from our council, both what's happening at the steering committee level, how we are in a transition with the, I guess, the standing up of the climate office, or is it called the Climate Action Office? I'll find out. We are going to hear about task groups, and especially we want to bring your attention to what's happening with the transportation rulemaking public engagement process that we've discussed previously. Then we're going to move to the next stage of our conversation where we left off last time, which you'll remember was a really an engagement, a creative one. Thank you, Indra, around Jamboard about sort of our aspirations and interests. And we're going to try to coalesce around where we go as a group and what our roles are in the next period of time. We're going to then have some public comment. And then at the end, I guess we're really talking about capacity and our future meeting schedule. Okay. I want to just see right now if there are any changes to that agenda or clarifications. Okay. And I'm then going to say, are there any changes or reflections, concerns about our minutes from our 7/21 meeting? The only thing I noted that the note taker wasn't called out, so we could add that. I think it was Carrie. Yeah, so maybe just add that. I think it might be helpful to know. And now, drum roll, is there anyone willing to be tonight's note taker? The drum is still rolling.
Sue, I can take notes.
Sarah, that's really kind of you. Thank you. Okay, that's wonderful. If folks want to just add a reflection of gratitude, that's, I think, Sarah's legacy to this group, is that we begin with some gratitude, get a little spirit in there, and share that in the chat. And yeah, I'll say I'm grateful for Sarah for taking notes. And without further ado, why don't I turn it to Jane? Maybe you begin with the steering committee climate council update. And I was really hoping to make it and didn't, so I look forward to that. Yeah, why don't you take it from here? Thanks.
Thanks. Evening, everyone. I'll start by saying that I'm grateful for a few days off. I'm just fresh back. You can tell from camping. I'm clean and showered and sitting down with all of you. So the steering committee meeting on Monday. The meeting started with, there has been interest from the council to understand capacity with respect to legal services. And their A&R and the Public Service Department are both listed within the Global Warming Solutions Act to provide legal services to the council. And there's been some challenges around what that means. A&R's general counsel was able to provide a legal services memo and an update to the council around counsel to the council. So we started off the meeting to discussing that. And we can drop in the chat, hopefully Marion can, while I'm talking, a link to the memo for folks who are interested around the role of what A&R can and can't do with respect to conflict of interest. And so that was helpful with respect to the conversations after that, which really are thinking about the council's work for this fall, and looking forward to what the priority setting the council is interested in doing, both around further prioritization of recommendations in the CAP that would advance during this legislative session as priorities. The council I'll just say, hasn't really continued to pick up on that theme at the steering committee, and rather has really shifted to thinking about how to intervene within a timely fashion this year, rather than too little too late last year with the governor's budget, to make recommendations for additional capacity needs. And capacity needs are sort of falling in two buckets: capacity for work that the state is helping facilitate, whether that's technical analysis that some of the subcommittees want to further, public engagement, outreach work. That is one bucket of sort of like, how much money do we need to continue to make progress in that space? But then there was also conversation with the steering committee. Well, yes, that's important, but two, we also want to be thinking about what's the capacity needed to further the recommendations in the climate action plan. So weatherization is one that comes to mind, Sarah, like thinking about that we have funding right now for a finite period, but how do we further think about funding into the future and how to start to set the stage for that? So there are sort of these two buckets, and the and Costa, I'll pause in a minute for any questions. The steering committee sort of honed in on a timeline for how they would need to weigh in the governor's process, which is sooner than everybody thought, or I guess maybe sooner than I thought. I kind of thought we had the fall to advance these prioritization, but Secretary Clouser spoke to the timeline of agencies and wanting the council to participate on a similar timeline to when agencies provide anticipated budget to the governor, as October 11th is that date that has been put forward to agencies. And so sometime by mid-October, the idea would be to plug into the governor's thinking in his budget that the council would put forward a memo with priorities and anticipated funding needs, so that the governor could consider it both in A&R's budget to further the work of the Climate Council, but also in other appropriate state agencies like the Public Service Department or Department of Children and Families, or wherever we think those priorities should be lifted up. This has all happened pretty quickly, as you can imagine, and so it doesn't leave much time to think about what that looks like for both subcommittees and then ultimately the council. But the idea is that subcommittees would lift up a rough suite of areas of work come September council meeting, which is mid-September. At the same time, A&R would put together an ongoing list of sort of the technical analyses and work that we're carrying forward and anticipated additional funding needs to further those analyses, as well as how much capacity we think we have in order to further advance additional work that subcommittees might put forward. I've also heard from, I know, Public Service Department specifically around the interest of sort of thinking for them also to be also able to speak to their capacity and work in their space, and what the role is of the Climate Office to coordinate that on behalf of other agencies. So I think this will continue to be a work in progress, that we refine how we do this now that we have a schedule, but the idea is that subcommittees will lift up some suite of priorities in September, and then at the October council meeting, we would be able to select those priorities to put forward in a memo. And then finally, the only other update from that specific steering committee meeting was that the agenda for the September council meeting was finalized. And in addition to thinking about budget priorities and hearing from subcommittee members, the main component of that meeting will be to focus on the transportation addendum for the climate action plan. There is a suite of draft recommendations from the task group to attach to the climate action plan at this point. We'll get a preview and have a substantive conversation at the September meeting with the council in anticipation of furthering that work at future council meetings and moving to adopt an addendum to the climate action plan in that space. You'll remember that the only other substantive component of work that's still ongoing for this fall is in the biomass space. And we'll look to an October council meeting to start to preview those recommendations. They're not ready yet, but we're hopeful that we're working towards the October meeting. So I'll pause there. I know there's probably more questions around the budget and prioritization, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And Chris, obviously you were at the meeting, so please fill in what I might have missed.
You did a great summary, Jane. I just want to note, this is a topic that keeps coming up, but one of the things, I think it'd be really healthy for the council to recognize is, it's reasonable to expect that the administration members have to do what their boss tells them to do, because that's the nature of being employed by someone working for someone, right? So it's possible that what the governor might recommend may not, and what the appointed members of the council recommend may not necessarily, may differ somewhat, or not at all, who knows, from what other members of the council feel when it comes to developing a budget, what the needs are and priorities and that kind of thing. And I don't think there's any need to set up any conflict or animus or anything like that, but it could be that, there's the administration's position, and it's awesome that they're welcoming input into that budgetary process, which that's wonderful. But there may be another opinion about that that may differ from the governor and his appointed folk. So just wanted to say, hopefully as the process goes on, we'll be able to kind of accommodate both, if there's such a need. And yeah, so just want to kind of put that out there. Hopefully it could just kind of be, at worst, like agree to disagree, but at best, kind of like, here's the governor's position, and the other members of the council, if there's like a consensus among like non-administration members, agree that these would be other good things that are necessary. So just to provide that additional perspective. But like I said, I think it is great that we're already talking now about helping to inform the governor's budget.
Thanks, Koshka. Did you have a question?
So I don't have a question, but I just wanted to kind of add on to what Chris and Jane were saying about the meeting. And I think it's really important for us in Just Transitions to understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, but what I gathered from the meeting is that we have some work to do in Just Transitions to really kind of think about, jot down and put together some recommendations from us as the Just Transition Subcommittee, so that those can be entered and given to the council for, I guess it's the September, right? Because then Secretary, she was saying by October, it's going to be too late. So, I mean, the next meeting, we need something to put together for recommendations as a Just Transition Subcommittee, what we think is important for the budget. So I think that needs to be really elevated, I guess, for us as members of this committee, because then it's going to be too late. And we can just, just let that go. So, so I think that we do have some work to do as a subcommittee in that respect, number one. And then number two, as far as the council to the council, what I understood from that is that the legal advisors are there for A&R, and they're not really there for they're certainly not there for any climate council members to offer advice or anything like that. Any kind of questions or whatever it may be would have to directly come from the climate council as a whole. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. Like if us as a Just Transitions subcommittee, would we need to put together any kind of questions or whatever we have to the climate council, and then the climate council as a whole would then directly go to the legal counsel that is effectively representing A&R. Is that correct? Am I correct in that, Jane?
Yeah, that was actually a great summary. I think if there were legal questions that were percolating at a subcommittee, those would have to be lifted up to the council. And then I think the question that you were highlighting, or consideration that Ed McNamara, General Counsel, spoke to, was that there are individual counselors who have had legal questions, but it's not appropriate for an individual counselor to ask for legal counsel or interpretation from the council. It would have to be a request as a whole from the council. So the council would be making the request. And yes, all of that was actually really helpful clarity and questions.
And as far as the others, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was
and
just going to offer a clarifying point on what Jane just shared too. And I think the reason for that is because under the rules of professional conduct that govern attorney practice, the council would be represented as what's called an organizational client, similar to how the agency is an organizational client. So the legal counsel, like for the agency, is like individual staff members, you know, they have to work through their supervisors in order to ask legal advice, and then it works through the proper channels, and then, you know, the ultimate decision maker, you know, is the secretary. So it's a similar, I know the Climate Council isn't the same as an agency, but that's where that kind of model structure comes from. I don't know if that was helpful.
You all, I know you guys all know Rachel, but Rachel,
Sorry,
obviously,
Rachel, she's her agency natural resources attorney.
Thank you.
and she helped Ed put together the memo, so it's great that she's here.
And then just as
David.
far as our role as just transitions, and then the work that we have to do to bring forth any recommendations regarding the budget. Did I get that right, Jane? Because it seems like, I mean, we don't have a lot of time. I'm not even sure if we're meeting or how does that work?
So September would be where you would present your initial cut of priorities. At the same time, A&R would present on our own ongoing work and list of funding and budgeting components, as well as some expected capacity that we would have in order to further the work of subcommittees that are the priorities that are being lifted up by subcommittees. So hopefully by putting that all out there in September, we would be able to work with the council to identify a target that we're shooting for, and then think through what the process looks like between September and October to further refine that list of priorities and have a final actionable list at the October council meeting that we would transfer into a memo to the governor.
And I just want to say, Kashka, that we're going to get to that in the agenda that's set tonight. But yes, very good point. We have some important decisions to make in order to be relevant to this process, and we're going to have to do it in the next 6 weeks. And thanks for the overview or enhanced understanding of the legal counsel. David, did you have another point?
I was just going to follow up on what you just said, Sue, which is tonight, we're going to talk about these priorities for budgeting. It's one of the things we have to do tonight.
Good. All right, we're going to keep moving so we have enough time to do that. I want to, okay, Jane, go back to you, but I also want to sort of move forward as quickly as we can to the transportation piece, because we're trying, we have another 15 minutes or so. Okay, thanks.
1 second. I just thought you would all be happy to know that there's a new youth counselor who was just appointed. That was also discussed at the steering committee meeting. She is from Norwich, Vermont. She was the only applicant outside of Chittenden County. She's super wonderful. We actually worked really closely with Becca Balance, the Secretary Pro Tem's assistant, to try to recruit folks from outside of the highway corridors, really looking at the Southwest or Northeast, but nobody was able to step forward. And so, but we're excited. Lily, she'll be at the meeting in September, and we'll drop her bio in the chat, which Marion's updated and is on our website. So just wanted to put that forward. And also one thing, we did our minute taking and note taking reflecting public comment differently. And we spoke to that at the steering committee meeting. Just so everybody knows, we normally just reflect names of people who spoke, and based on feedback from the last special meeting of the council that the public often doesn't feel heard, even though behind the scenes sometimes we are really trying to take in what they say and make adjustments. We now created David Cameron, who puts together the meetings for the minutes for council meetings, actually reflected action items that were highlighted by the public, and we had thank yous from the public at the steering committee meeting, which was really nice.
Great. Well, that's important for our task group, public engagement. Is there any chance that the youth member will join our subcommittee like Iris did?
Marianne and I are working on setting up a meeting with her for next week to talk with her, and we will recruit her for Just Transitions, but also let her know where else she can serve.
Sounds good. We have a full panoply of members right now, so it isn't really essential. It's just nice. It makes sense in my mind. Okay. Any more questions for Jane or others regarding the steering committee and council work? Otherwise, why don't I pass it to you, Rachel, if that makes sense, to talk about the transportation public engagement. And then after that, I'm going to please put a note in the chat if you have an update you want to share from a task group. Okay, Rachel, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Rachel from Agency Natural Resources back with just to share updates on the rulemaking for the low emission and electric vehicle proposed rules that were filed by the agency. So the update is that we've officially formally filed the rule last week with the Secretary of State's office, which initiates a formal process through the Administrative Procedure Act for the rules. And that is now underway, which means that the public comment period is officially open and will be open until September 30th. And I want to we issued a press release yesterday with the full schedule for the public events. I'm going to put it in the chat. The press release has all the relevant links that you might be interested in. And I'll just share what those are. There's the schedule for the events, the locations, and the times. There's also the Zoom link for the virtual meeting, which is at the end of September. There is an RSVP page, which is not required, but is recommended, or we're encouraging it so that we can identify if there are any language access or accessibility needs. Also, so we can get a head count for food, which we are planning to provide at the meetings. And also to identify if there's going to be kids at the meetings, in which case we'll try to arrange some activities. So far, only 3 people have RSVP'd. It's probably because the press release just went out and people don't necessarily read the RSVPs. So my request from this group is to really kind of activate everyone to begin to do outreach within your networks. We really want to make sure that we have robust attendance at these meetings. And so I think the press release is a great link to share. There's also each individual event is also linked on the Climate Council website. So if you want, for instance, if you know that you're just planning to do outreach for the Burlington event and you just want one link with all the information for Burlington, you can find that on the Climate Council website. We also have the draft rule, some summary documents, and other information on our website. So that's the update. I think that the last meeting we talked about the proposed agenda and the outline, and still open for feedback for those meetings. We've been working with David, who's here, to try to help do some meeting design and respond to the feedback that we've gotten. Another update is that we confirm that we'll have at each of the events a table from the Vermont Agency of Transportation and Drive Electric, hopefully at each event, to provide information about incentives or other programs that are existing, like rideshare, that kind of thing. So open to any questions or feedback, but just wanted to provide the update. And I think the press release is a good link just because it has all the other links that you might need. That's all I have.
Rachel, thank you. And I'm wondering if we haven't already, if we can share that press release with our full group And also with the encouragement, and, I could do that, Abby and I could do that with the encouragement to send this out to your networks, because I think what we hope is that we have networks that are maybe different, hopefully, or extending upon the traditional folks who we know are often engaged, because we're trying to reach beyond that. So just a thought. Any questions or comments for Rachel about the rules, new rulemaking? Okay.
Can I just echo what you said though, Sue, which is this is a really good time for just transition members, subcommittee members to activate their networks. Because these meetings are going to be interesting and interactive, and there's opportunities for language interpretation if you need it. And so if we wanted to activate, this is time to do it. So I would encourage everybody to think about how to make that happen. And for those who aren't here tonight, we can make some individualized connections maybe.
And we really are making space for the discussions about, the broader policy implications and, what other policies need to be in place. So I'm hoping that, these meetings, as David said, will be productive, feel like a really great opportunity to provide input in a meaningful way and make plenty of space for that. So I think obviously we want to get public comment on the rules and explain the implications, but also have a discussion. One more piece before I turn to you, Chris, is I did want to mention that we had gotten a lot of requests from fleet owners, that own or purchase medium and heavy duty vehicles such as trucks, to host an info session specifically on the advanced clean trucks rule. So it's not on the public event schedule, but we are hosting a stakeholder meeting, kind of an information session where we're going to do a deep dive on the rules about trucks. So I would say technically, that is an open meeting. So if you have a stakeholder or someone that's specifically interested in the trucks, that's fine. We may actually even record the meeting and post that at a later date. But I think, I think in terms of community members, I think these public events are going to be really the forum for that. And the information session on the 6th is going to be more of the technical discussion specifically for, agencies that purchase large fleets, or, auto manufacturers and dealers. So that's kind of the audience for that meeting, but just wanted to mention that. And if folks would like the information, I'd be glad to share it. Chris.
I didn't know if Sue or Abby maybe want to send a specific email to our membership and whoever's on our list, just noting, in addition, like to the press release, also just noting, this is kind of rubber meeting the road stuff, no pun intended. This is real world. This is happening. Whether Vermont likes it or not, it's not really. So it's really important for people to kind of share, hopefully not only these are my concerns, but also these are opportunities that I see about how to make this work in my house, in my community. Because, this rule, was it 15 states are adopting it? The European Union's adopting it. It's majority of the population, I think it's 1/3 of light vehicles that are purchased in the United States in a year are in these 15 states. So it's a real opportunity. I really appreciate A&R, hearing what folk were saying about this not being just a conventional standard hearing on rules. They actually heard what this subcommittee and others said about, hey, this needs to be different than usual. So that's progress, because sometimes people get down if they don't see progress being made, but this is real progress. This is, the work that they're doing on this rule.
Yeah, I want to echo that and even amplify that normally rulemaking is a seriously insider process. And this really is an effort to make it much more inclusive. And that is a response to our very work in this subcommittee. So thanks for reminding us of that. And it is sort of up to us to try to get more people and more, I guess, real engagement. So to your point, Chris, I agree that I'll work with Abby on sort of an introduction to not only the press release, but if we do have a flyer, it sounds like that's in action. Let's make sure that we'll send it to our group with the flyer, because I think for many of our networks, that's going to be more relevant or perhaps more approachable. Any other questions or thoughts about how to get the word out, so to speak, or anything about this process that you want to add?
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm trying to take notes, so it's keeping me quiet. That was a good strategy, Sue. I think, so I may have missed it because I'm like taking notes, looking at the link. But is I mean, besides asking us to mobilize our communities, great. Is ANR doing any outreach to organizations to encourage participation besides the normal players? And you know, besides, I saw, you know, I pulled in the press release. I think it's okay. I'm just curious, and we can duplicate efforts. I mean, with you all, I think that's also always great, right? I'm just curious.
Yeah, we're working on it. I mean, last week was really focused on updating the rule package, and so now we're turning to like launching. So definitely welcome to feedback. But yeah, so as of now, you know, we've mobilized our. We worked with regional planning commissions to help do some of the logistics for finding locations. So we've connected with them. Several of the venues have offered to do outreach. For instance, the Burlington Community Center had offered to share with their, you know, networks and to post flyers and that kind of thing. So we are working with some specific of the venues and partners in that regard. I don't think we have like an email list. We're pulling, we can pull one together if it makes sense to send a specific kind of stakeholder list. We have had some organizations reach out individually and ask for the links. So I assume that that may be happening. NRDC reached out for information. I know Sierra Club Vermont reached out for links, but yeah, we can definitely take this feedback and put together kind of an outreach list. I think this was kind of one of our early stops is the subcommittee, and yeah, we can keep moving.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I just say I feel like we have in different conversations around community engagement generated many lists of different organizations that are trusted partners reaching different communities. I feel like somebody could dig one of those out and it could be a starting place for ANR, but I do feel like that would be really important, because otherwise we do these events and the typical players, as you know and appreciate, I think are the ones that show up, and that's not necessarily the intent of these.
Yeah, that's good feedback. One omission that I forgot to mention is that we do have a community engagement kind of contract with the Rejoice Partnership and some of the Center for Whole Communities that are also doing events this summer. And so they had offered, you know, once we had the press release and the events ready to go, to mention it at those meetings. And I mentioned Drive Electric Vermont is also mobilizing outreach and has agreed to attend the meeting. So I'd be glad to kind of pull all this together if folks want to see a more kind of comprehensive outreach strategy. But we're definitely making every effort to respond to feedback and to, you know, as we move forward. So appreciate it.
Yeah, and I do want to, yeah, Sarah's reminded me, we spent a lot of time developing lists early on, and I don't know where they are, but I suspect they're somewhere, and maybe Jane, you can dig them up. But yeah, there were a lot of thought and time went into that. So thanks for the reminder, Sarah. Okay, let's keep moving. Good ideas. We have a few minutes before, but I'd like to see what task group feedback or whatever updates we might have. Like, I know David and Indra are doing at least something for the public engagement. Is there anything else for public? Do you want to reflect on the focus group, or are there other task groups that people are participants of that want to share? Now's your time.
I will just note that Chase Whiting, on behalf of your group, participates in the biomass task group. And he's done a really great job of sort of broadening the conversation in that space. And actually tomorrow at lunch, we brought David in, and we're going to be holding a listening session for North End residents around the McNeil plant in response to concerns that Judy Dow and Chase have brought up over and over that we need to hear from people in the space. And Kashka's helping us with that tomorrow too. So it's great. It's been great to have Chase engaged in that task group.
Yeah, Kashka, go ahead.
So, excuse me, I just needed to say something regarding what we're doing tomorrow regarding the McNeil plant. So Chase and I had a conversation. I live in the Old North End, so I thought, my gosh, I can definitely bring this out to my community members. Excuse me, not just my co-op, but so many neighbors and neighborhoods that were all kind of tightly intertwined. And I wish that I had something to bring them. I have nothing to bring to them. So it's just, I know that we're meeting tomorrow and the listening sessions tomorrow, but I haven't really had a chance to do anything towards it. And I think that's just kind of part of my, I guess, aggravation with the process a little bit. So I've made myself available for that. But it's, yeah, anyway, just some
Kashka,
frustration.
I'm reading that tomorrow is a planning session for the listening session. Is that what I'm seeing from a chat?
Oh,
Jane?
it is? Oh, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
I clearly like mislabeled that meeting because I had a very long phone call with Judy this week too, who thought she was coming to the listening session on Friday. So, no, it's really about how to thoughtfully hold that space and what that would look like. Yeah, and whether it should be for McNeil, residents around McNeil, or residents around McNeil and Rygate, should we hold separate? What, like, just questions.
Okay, thank you all. Anything else that's going on in task groups that you want everyone to hear? Okay, I guess not. All right. Got Jane?
Well, just since many of you are participating, but I don't think Sue and Carrie were able to join the last meeting with us, we have selected a contractor to work with us on the Municipal Vulnerability Index project. And so we're moving forward with negotiating with the top pick in that space. So there were 5 applicants. We asked for follow-up from top 2 consultants and are moving forward with developing a contract with one of them now. I don't really know when you're in contract negotiations if I should name it's probably fine, but I think I'll just, yeah, David's like, no, I don't think I'm supposed to. So I'll let you know we're negotiating, and we're actually meeting with them and our IT folks first, because there was a concern around whether or not everybody likes this contractor, except we're concerned about how their application will work with state IT systems in the end. So we're having a meeting with them, but we have a really great number 2 if it doesn't work out.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for all those updates, and thanks for everybody who stays involved in various task groups. At this point, I'd love to sort of hand this section of the meeting over to David, who I think is working also with Indra, to kind of follow next steps from our last conversation around how are we doing and where are we going. Go ahead, David. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Sue, and thanks, everybody. Yeah, Indra, let's tag team this a little bit, in part because I missed some of the last meeting when you were doing this work. The intention here is to pick up where we left off, where you all left off last time, in that exercise of trying to really say, where are we as a group? What's inspiring us to be here? And what do we really want to be achieving? And there's been a lot of frustration and confusion about role and about the actual work that needs to get done. And so what we're going to try to do now is take what you said last time and then translate that into something that's pretty straightforward and simple about role and what to do. As part of this conversation, we want to then pivot into what Kashka and others were mentioning earlier about the importance of lifting up some priorities for the budget process. And we could do that tonight as well. All right. So let me walk through what we got here, and I'll share my screen as I do it. So I'm going to share 3 slides of just what you produced last time with your Jamboard. All right. So the first conversation you all had was about the inspiration to join. And you said a bunch of things, and we're not going to read through them right now, but you talked about the different things that are important about joining this effort and being inspired by it. Okay, so that was the first thing you spoke about. The second thing you spoke about was about some of the challenges you felt in this process, right? And so you can see what those are here on the screen. And one of those challenges is a lack of clarity on role. And also the frustrations about how this gets picked up or doesn't get picked up in the work by the Climate Council, by state government. And that sort of translation into the work that happens in state government or the work that might happen in the legislature. Okay, so that was challenges. The third thing you talked about was aspirations and expectations. Okay, so here you named a whole bunch of interesting things about what you'd like to see happen. Okay, whether it's the Just Transition Committee does it or not, but these are things you'd like to see happen. And you can see a variety of them. They're not super summarized here, but they're worth sort of just glancing for a second, right? Like to see more engagement from our community members, right? Like to see the resources to do the work. Like to see more diverse membership on the council, right? This kind of stuff. All right, what did I do? And with Indra's help, is to say, if you really had to boil all of this down, these things that you were speaking about and writing about last session, in my mind, it kind of boils down to these 2 things. And this is a very highly summarized piece, and we welcome feedback on making this better, right? But if I boiled all this down, what I really sense coming out of this group is you'd like to see more and better engagement with frontline and marginalized communities, right? That sort of frustration Kashka was talking about just briefly moments ago, of like, it's not quite happening the way I'd like to see it happen, right? And that is because you want to be lifting up those voices, you want to be empowering those voices to have voice, and you also want to be engaging more people around climate action. All right. So that's the engagement piece. And on the second piece, it's about how all this is getting implemented by the council and its subcommittees, the task groups, in state government, and legislature, right? How are these core principles, these just transitions principles that we gave birth to, really landing and really having an influence on what's happening in these different spaces? So this was my effort to say, of everything I'm hearing, this is the sort of 2 biggies that are able to summarize where you would like to take all this. So the question then becomes, what is the role of this subcommittee in realizing that aspiration, right? What are we actually doing? And ever since we finished doing the Just Transitions Principles, which was this incredibly heavy lift last year, we've been a little bit at sea, it's felt, not really sure what we're actually doing as a group. And that's been frustrating for everybody, I think. And when we sit back and look at this, and this is part of the conversations with your co-chairs as well, and you think about the capacity that this group has, that the co-chairs have in their leadership time, and the staff support that really will be available, particularly as A&R transitions into this climate action office, it really starts to feel like this group is an advisory body that provides important advice in a variety of places and doesn't hold out the fact that somehow it can then go forth and implement this stuff. because the capacity just isn't here for us to do that. But there is capacity to provide really valuable advice, right? Advice to the council, advice to the other subcommittees, advice to state government, right? And potentially advice in other places as well, right? There's a question mark here. Beyond that advisory role, is there something else we should be doing, right? So again, this is just some initial thoughts on a page. We want to talk about it. Let me show another slide or two, and then let's start to talk about this. So when thinking about everything that was on that Jamboard and sort of the reality of being an advisory body, where can we have the most impact and focus our efforts? One of these things clearly could be this first bullet, which is about the funding. Oops, something just jumped, which is about the funding priorities for the council, right? And because the council will be providing recommendations on the governor's budget. So if we can channel stuff up to the council, all of a sudden we're having a stronger voice on budget. And we didn't really have that last year because it all happened very late. There clearly is a role around providing advice on public engagement strategies and efforts, right? The public engagement task group is sort of the tip of the spear on that, but you all as an overall subcommittee are very important, right? This is having an impact. We see it right now in what Rachel's doing on the rulemaking, right? So this is having an impact. It should continue to have an impact. In terms of policy and climate action policy, we absolutely should be doing what Chase is doing and others in being involved in the subcommittees and the task groups to bring that just transition lens to that policy conversation, right? So that gets lifted up into the council, right? That's clearly a place for us. And then with the implementation of programs by the state's Climate Action Office and elsewhere across the state, this subcommittee can be helpful in providing advice, sharing a just transition and equity lens, right? There is likely much more, right? But this is to get the conversation going. Specific areas of work where you all can have significant influence and we're clear on what we're doing. And then for this, we'll go into this in a second, but this is about the budgeting piece. And we do want to spend a little time on this later this evening, but let's not talk about it just yet. So let me back up a little bit and maybe even drop the slides for a second. And I'll ask Indra to help out and supplement what I've missed and what we're trying to convey here. And then let's have a conversation if this is making sense as a way to distill this conversation around aspiration, expectation, and our actual role.
I think you did a great job. So I don't know if I have a lot more to say, but one thing that I see as an overarching theme here is there is an aspiration among us. There is the willingness to do the work, but the lack of clarity on the role, not only based on the limitations that we have, but what is our authority, what is our capacity, what is our limitation, and what are we actually able to contribute? That role versus the work that we want to do, the lack of sense of purpose in some way, because David, as you're referencing back to the just transition principle, there was something that we could do and know that we did it. But right now we come to the meeting, we have a lot of discussion, but how is it really creating that impact that we want to see, the aspiration that we have? The disconnection between the two, I think, is a major theme that comes out of this, right? So, and both of those, I think, can be answered by really talking about what is it that we want to do? How do we bring in those just transition and equitable lens to all the work that is happening, while also underscoring the limitations that we have? Because in some of my conversation, I've said, there's more we can do, but can we really do that? If we can, then how can we contribute? I think if we can discuss around that and find a way to, answer that dilemma that we have, that disconnect that we have between the role and the defined sense of purpose, I think we'll be able to, feel better about the work that we are trying to do.
That's great. That's really great. And just one quick thing I want to say, Sarah, before that is, in terms of what that may translate into the practicalities of the work, sort of the rhythm of that work, it probably means less frequent meetings, say more like a quarterly meeting, some good communication in between meetings about what's going on in the various venues that we care about in the council and elsewhere. Maybe we try to get together in person, right? And really start to build also a tightness among ourselves as a Just Transition subcommittee. And we really want to be involved in the task groups and the other subcommittees as they're doing their work. So just a note about that, what this all might mean in terms of the rhythm of the work. Sarah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just started reacting to a lot, and you went through a lot of slides quickly. So I just want to hone in on Indra. I really appreciate your statement going back to the lack of clarity on our role and considering what's feasible for us to do. I think that's really important. I think I want to say my first reaction is that it's not a good use of my time to show up to a quarterly meeting and provide my opinions on where engagement meetings should be held or what somebody should be working on. And I think that's a gut reaction. So I just want to be really honest about that. And then I think, but more to the point, I don't see that as meaningful work. I think that's why that's my gut reaction, is like, it doesn't feel like it's meaningful work for a climate council subcommittee to be weighing in quarterly and showing up at random subcommittee meetings to be giving their advice on their equity lens as a way to move forward the Just Transitions principles. Because when I go back to sort of like, what does this group want to see move forward? We want to see those principles implemented. We want to see accountability to them. And this plan, as in terms of, which again, I say kudos to be like, what's feasible, but this plan doesn't speak to that in my mind. It doesn't help us do that work. So that, I mean, I don't know what to say, but like that, it's just not, this has been a frustrating moment, I think, not just for me, but for many other people, that we come to these meetings month after month and talk about the work we want to see move forward, talk about the resources we need to make it happen, have a conversation about that work, and then there's no movement on any of it. There's no commitment to move any of it forward. So we can keep tooting the horn about like how public engagement needs to improve, but we've been doing that, so like now I feel like it's coming back to be like, okay, keep doing that, keep tooting the horn on why that's important. It doesn't feel like a good use of time and if I'm feeling that way, I feel like others might feel that way. So
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how to characterize this, but it almost feels like, because I'm wondering if we kind of got to that point because a lot of what we were focused on initially was kind of advising the council on, have you considered this in your outreach? Have you considered that? We've advised a lot on process. A big piece that I feel is missing, and I don't know how to resolve this, but I'm just going to put it out there, is having people on the frontline communities in not only in the subcommittee, but in like cross-sector mitigation, in transportation task group, in the other subcommittees, in the rural resilience group, talking about the policies and application thereof more than what we've got now, because it feels to me like we engage a lot around the process about who should be included, but then really it feels like when it really comes down to the development of the policy recommendations, but implementing those and the action strategies, the voices just aren't as present in the planning realm and other realms. What's increasingly been done is for communities that are typically underrepresented in a process, provide them access to their own experts to arrive at conclusions and bring those to the table, as opposed to kind of being told by other experts about what their options are. So that way they can, those communities or people can, like I say, arrive at their own conclusion. And it may be similar to the other conclusions, or maybe something different. But from what I understand, the research shows that way people feel much more empowered, they feel much more ownership. And frankly, it's beneficial to the process because it kind of helps break up what the groupthink that can emerge when people who are kind of talking to each other all the time around these topics, kind of reach conclusions. It's helpful to have, other people kind of challenge those conclusions or share different observations. So I'm not sure how to necessarily get at that at this scale of an effort, but just wanted to put that out there, and maybe that. And I may be alone in this perspective. I recognize that because I'm coming from a position of great privilege, so I may be off.
Thanks, Chris. Jane and Abby. Hang on a second, Jane, you're still on mute.
Lowered my hand and forgot mute. I guess I just wanted to offer that I have noticed that all subcommittees, except for cross-sector that are still grappling with substantive components for the CAP, are struggling with clarity and purpose around meeting. And so just validate the way you're feeling about the role of the subcommittee. But I also just wanted to sort of push back a little on Sarah's comments around implementation and the change of practice that I really see and have seen as we've been moving forward with the discrete components of implementation that we're actually doing from the CAP. Every one of our task groups have someone from Just Transitions lifting up voices around guiding principles and challenging the way we're drafting RFPs, challenging the way we're writing contracts, challenging the way we're reviewing those components of work and thinking about the process. And those groups are meeting weekly generally or bi-weekly and really doing things very differently from what I've seen in my tenure at the state. And so do just want to say that, it's not a wholesale change, but the process feels very different to me. And I think the RFI, like that PSD around the request for engagement, or RFI as it was called, for how we're going to advance changes in the renewable energy space is a really good example of that, as others are. So I do just want to say that it's hard to think about the ongoing role of the subcommittees when not putting forward a plan, but really and thinking about how those task groups are challenging the way we're thinking about implementation, and do just want to give credit to those groups for doing things differently than we have in the past.
Thanks, Jane. Abby?
Thanks, David. So I was thinking, based on the comments that you just made, Sarah, and yours too, Jane, that my sense from these scope of work or work planning exercises that we've done, the challenge has been to, in my mind, to align the capacity of the subcommittee with what we want to see happen as a just transition group. So the conflict being, what do we as a subcommittee have capacity to do, and what do we want to see happen? And so what I was then starting to kind of try to come to terms with was, then what could we contribute? So I feel like as the group responsible for the development of the guiding principles, I still feel like there's a core function there that we hold that no one else can really do or offer the same degree of expertise around. And so, I was sort of thinking maybe some of our subcommittee meetings and Indra, you had made reference to this at one point, that our subcommittee meetings are opportunities to kind of go back to the intent of the guiding principles and like turn these meetings into almost like training sessions so that we kind of become, this is going to sound terrible, but like proselytized to be able to like speak to the guiding principles. And then, and then we have engagement with task groups or reviewing RFPs or being part of the actual implementation work, and that we almost play like an advocacy role. You know, it sounds a little bit like what it sounds like Chase has been doing and maybe other subcommittee members have been doing in the various task groups to kind of like poke and remind about the importance of the guiding principles. And then I don't know if then there's also an opportunity for, you know, engagement in the public events. So whether that's attending public engagement meetings and again, speaking to the guiding principles and how they are or may not be accurately represented in the work that's being proposed. So anyway, that was a thought that I was having as I was listening today.
Thanks. Claire, and then let's sort of take stock of what's going on here. Go ahead, Claire.
I don't know, maybe in a different direction than Abby's comment, but one thing I had kind of been reflecting on before this meeting, and maybe it was triggered again when Sarah mentioned like a quarterly meeting not feeling like a good use of time, is it almost feels like one of the reasons that we have been kind of like drifting at sea is actually because of how infrequently we meet, which is a weird thing when we're all struggling with capacity to meet once a month. But it feels like we start these conversations and we just start to get into the substance of what we want to do and how we want to be. And then the 2 hours is over. And then we spend time a month later, like reminding ourselves where we were. And then that prevents us from getting to the substance again. So that's a conflict, right? We struggle to be here once a month and like be invested, but then only meeting once a month, we kind of just lose this momentum every single time. And it feels like maybe meeting quarterly would even make that worse in some ways until we figure out what that purpose is and what the work needs to be done and how to organize around that work. So I was thinking about that during the co-chairs planning meeting and didn't vocalize it, but it just struck me again. So I wanted to share it.
Thanks, Claire. I love these counterintuitive things. Sue, Indra?
Yeah, I want to just vocalize that I think the vision of possibly having this group meet quarterly wasn't, okay, we won't meet until quarterly, but that we would in fact meet as smaller groups more regularly. Because I think it's just, and I will just put out there, I can't continue to even do the minor bit of co-chairing that I'm doing, and it's preventing me from being engaged at another level on some other group. And so if, you know, I do really want to raise the capacity issue is very real, and the capacity we currently have with A&R and other staff is going to go away. So we're trying to be a little more realistic about, well, what can we do in that reality? And maybe it's, you know, kind of having smaller groups doing certain tasks. And so that's just a reflection. And I'm very much ready to pass the baton. And I don't want to do that without finding someone who can fill in, because Abby is busier perhaps than I. So that is, I think, the pressure that we feel. And we don't feel that we can do an adequate job. And on top of that, see that A&R is needing to step way back. I don't know about the other staff member from other agencies. So that's really important to be aware. And I do want to say, back sort of to where we were when Kashka last spoke, we do have an opportunity right now, and a very, very important one, to really put our heads together about what do we think. In my mind, it's about public engagement and implementation of the guiding principles. That's what sticks out to me. What do we think that looks like and costs? And how do we lift that up in a very real sense to a budget process? And that could be a small group huddle. that comes up with proposals. I don't think we can miss September meeting because that will be the only time for us to talk about that, so that it can be presented to the September, or is it in October? Anyway, so I do want to say that's an idea of something that we need to huddle and then meet on. But I think going into the future, unless other people have capacity to lead and manage, I just don't know how we do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. Indra?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time like balancing facilitation and subcommittee member role. So I'm just gonna go ramble a little bit. What I hear us say is, this proposal really does address the limitation that we have, but maybe the bigger question is the sense of purpose. In a simple way of saying it, what the heck are we doing? Right? And even if we meet frequently, I don't know, based on my observation, if we will be able to address that. Because even when we meet once a month, I have seen us engage in this kind of honest conversation twice. Rest of the time, it is procedural. And if it is procedural, like we'll still leave the meeting feeling like, what the heck are we doing, right? So maybe the question is much more about like, can we have project-based discussions in smaller group that happens frequently, and the quarterly meeting or however we want to schedule becomes more of a reflection point where we can come share what we have learned, rather than it being, and I'm so used to it being all the marginalized identity, the poster child of equity and just transition, right? We have the members here meeting together and, oh yeah, it's happening, they're talking. And where the heck is the work happening, right? So in order to avoid that, maybe we need to take a step back and really ask ourselves, like, if we really do want to do the work, and based on the Jamboard that I saw, we do want to do the work. Because if you look at people's aspiration, like there is a reflection on people's privilege, there is a reflection on people's willingness to uplift the voices. How do we effectively do that without getting lost in the procedural meetings where we really don't get to the substance of that work? And I'm saying that now as a subcommittee because I have seen it happen when I started joining the public engagement after Sue asked me to. We immediately went to say, okay, can we have a focus group among the CAP agency staff to really understand what people are going through? And if we really have that focus group and bring our finding to the subcommittee and share and really even like prepare a guide for other organizations to do that, then we'll have a sense of purpose. So I think this question of what the heck are we doing, our sense of purpose, and the limitations should go hand in hand. And is there a way we could do that more effectively in subtasks? Because oftentimes I've seen it very difficult for people to even be very honest and open about their feelings and everything I'm all about government accountability and transparency, but it becomes really difficult when it is a publicly recorded meeting. And if we really want to flush out our ideas and do the effective work, is this the platform where we should be doing that work? Or are there creative ways we can advance those agenda? Maybe if we start to think from that perspective, we'll be able to answer the questions that we are asking.
Thanks, Indra. Thanks. Kelly, go ahead, please.
So, yes, I've been thinking about all of these things, and I really feel like you've all been saying very important things that a lot of them resonate with me. A couple points I want to hit are when we're talking about capacity, some of us don't get paid to do anything at all. Like what we do in this climate council, we at most we get per diems, and for task groups, they are $6.25 an hour. And that's not a lot of money. It's not nothing, but that's something that just when it comes to putting things to task groups, and I completely agree with you, Indra, I think that the conversations we can have in those task groups are really meaningful and important. And I think that having the smaller groups, the slightly, it feels more comfortable to speak when it's not a recorded meeting, to share your truth. Those are really important. And same with going out and doing public engagement and getting people's stories firsthand, collecting those and trying to bring those back and share them with the council or the subcommittees. Getting proper and sufficient compensation for people's time is going to be super important. people might think, oh, you know, you're a business owner, you make a lot of money. No, I do not make a lot of money. I am worse paid than anyone else in my company because I want to make sure that everyone else is living their best life and getting what they need. So this is not, this is coming from a place of I don't have the ability to necessarily give hours and hours to this work, but I think it's really, really important and I want to be part of it, but I need to say, like, this is what I have the capacity for. And I know that other folks are in the same position where they need to get food on the table. They need to make sure that their kids are fed and that they're putting in the hours at work and they may not have flexibility to attend things, but we want to hear those voices. And I do think that the task groups are a better place to start to actually get, you know, roll up our sleeves and get doing work and doing the things that we have been talking about in this group, but it's really tough, especially even if we met every week, it'd be tough for this group to keep moving forward at the size we are and the number of people we are. And to know that, yeah, so some of the state staff is going to be able to, you know, they're not going to have as much time or capacity. So I would love to hear about how we could potentially get more funding to properly compensate people who want to do the work but can't necessarily justify it financially, to be here and sit at the table with us. And I would also love to talk more about, and we've talked about this in our task group around community engagement, talk more about getting meetings where we can get stories from people and then have those liaisons bring them back. And I think that's the other thing that can be done and that we can use people who are interpreters, community interpreters, not like language interpreters per se, but use people who can really bring those stories and bring them to our subcommittees and our council as a whole. And that's something that I think would be really, really helpful. And I think something that our subcommittee could facilitate even with our limited resources.
Okay, super. All right. So we've heard a couple things, right? We've heard a sort of visceral reaction of like, as you described that plan, it didn't sound very compelling, right? We heard that. We heard the need that we need to be realistic. There's some question marks about what the capacity really is. And I'd love to circle back to folks who are really having that reaction of like, this doesn't feel like a good use of time. If we want to think about how would we shape this to be a good use of time, right? For the time that you have for this, what would make this particularly valuable? And then I want to hear a little bit from Jane to help clarify this capacity issue from a staff point. But before we go to that point, I'd just be interested for those of you who are struggling a little bit to be like, no, this isn't working. I wonder if you have some thoughts about what would make it a more compelling use of time in today's context.
Yeah, and David, thanks. I appreciate that because I was thinking of how to, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Now I'm raising my hand. Okay. How to be more concrete in the conversation. So I appreciate that. And I think, I just want to say, I think part of it is maybe something that Indra or someone else hinted at, which is it starts to feel really tokenistic to say that the way that we implement the just transition principles is that we have a subcommittee and that those people just show up at other meetings. And it starts to not feel like what I signed up for, which was that we were going to create tools and processes and policy and accountability within the Climate Council so that everyone was doing this work and structure and systems. So, and I feel like in this kind of work, it is classic to say we're going to have an equity committee and therefore that's going to be what, but I think it's also meaningful what Jane is saying, that having people in the room who are specifically there to lift up these issues helps move change forward. I don't deny that, but I also know that that feels really bad to people whose lived experience is what brings them to this work in particular. So, so I think that's part of my visceral reaction. So I think and to your question, David, where that leads me is like, what would feel different? And I feel like maybe what feels different is what I always feel like is like, gosh, it would have been great if we had a staff member who could carry forward, help us carry forward and organize some of the work of this committee. And kudos to the chairs, because I know what it takes to pull together these meetings, the meetings in between the meetings to do it. And it's a lot of work. And I always felt like even back then, gosh, it would have been nice to have somebody who was carrying that piece forward for us to help us do that. And so, maybe that's part of it. But like I go back to, we have specific recommendations of things that we think should be happening. We think people should be getting training on the principles. I don't think that our subcommittee members should be the ones providing the training, right? So maybe that we are an advisory capacity. I think we should have metrics around accountability, that we're all of our climate action that we're taking is held to, we're reporting back and looking back on metrics around equity to see if we're moving the needle. I don't think that our subcommittee necessarily needs to be the ones defining those and measuring them and reporting on them. But I think we can be, and maybe so advisory was maybe the way that I was reacting negatively to this, but we can be the committee that people have to come back to with that information, right? We're almost like the watchdog in that sense. It says like, you have to give a report back to this committee and then we can review it and evaluate it. Like, so we can, I don't think it's on us to do that work, but I think we have named some specific things that should happen. And I feel like, where's the accountability to make those things happen? I don't think it's for us to necessarily do them, but I don't want those things to get lost either. So I don't know. I also feel like other people have information around A&R staffing and changes that is influencing the proposal in front of us today that I don't think all of us have that information.
Yeah. I think it's important to hear that about the staffing thing. And Sarah, one of the things I heard when you were talking, when you said, oh yeah, we think people should be getting training. We've talked about that before. Like we'd like to have legislators get training, other folks get training. We think we should have metrics around accountability and then folks can report back to us. Those are things that would require some funding, right? Which would be perfect candidates for you all as the Just Transition Subcommittee to say, dear council, these are our priorities when we're thinking about budget, right? You should be putting money aside to do training for the legislature and other folks. You should be putting money aside to make sure we're generating metrics that are relevant for equity and just transitions, right? And oh, by the way, maybe our meeting should be a place where folks come and provide some account of how that's all going, right? Jane, do you want to say a word about this, what we're alluding to with like staff, this and, staff availability, A&R staff availability? Just so we're clear of all about what's going on there.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think it's kind of being, I don't want to say blown up, but just, I want to frame it as like uncertain as we move forward and just a shifting dynamic, okay? So when A&R was written into the Global Warming Solutions Act to provide administrative capacity to the council, there was no articulation that staff people would be given to the council to facilitate all the work of the council. That was something that A&R went above and beyond to provide, understanding that there was a climate action plan to be written on a really short timeline, and that in order to do that, there would need to be dedicated staff to help support that work. Now we're in this period of transition where we're standing up a climate action office of staff of 8 within the Agency of Natural Resources. Marianne is shifting from being the Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator to being that program manager for the resilience and adaptation work. I'm shifting into being the director of that office and having the responsibility of those 7 people underneath us and understanding what the role and responsibilities are of a new office that's hasn't been created yet. So it's just sort of this shifting landscape. That is not to say that there won't be any capacity. We intend to put forward a memo and a discussion for the council around sort of what A&R has been doing, what we envision our ongoing role and capacity to be. Certainly will provide capacity with respect to standing up and engaging within the public meeting rule, like providing all the agendas, posting, supporting the website. And we've been also articulating that rather than Marion and I showing up to all of the subcommittee meetings, there are going to be appropriate staff people in the Climate Action Office to staff each one of these subcommittees in a more thoughtful way, really, than Marion and I do right now, right? Because maybe not Marion, Marion's more thoughtful than me, but really being able to provide the knowledge and expertise to help guide the work. So Marion will do that for the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. And we are in the process of hiring a community engagement coordinator that will be the person who stands up and supports this subcommittee. What that role and responsibility looks like is sort of like TBD, but I certainly think many of the things that you're speaking to will fall to that person's job duties, and we'll have sort of the buck stop with them and help you all feel like this work is more than just us trying to like pin it all together, but be thoughtful in the way that we're really responding to all of you and speaking to how the commitment that you all are making, the application of the guiding principles, the metrics, all of that is being put into practice, not only in the Climate Action Office and A&R, but in how we're working collaboratively with all of the other amazing agencies that are already doing great climate work also. And so I think it's just transition right now, not a cut off of A&R. It's just like learning as we're in this new phase, just as you are with subcommittees, and that it'll be a different person. So that position is still with HR. It's been with HR for a month now, but we should have it, I keep being told, any day, and that will be posted as a new position within the Climate Action Office, and they will be in particular helpful with the community engagement, supporting the public engagement task group, thinking about this subcommittee, and then metrics for equity within the measuring and assessing progress tool, which I did just drop in the chat. We do have a large component of our budget right now to stand up this measuring and assessing progress tool, and we just haven't put the RFP out yet, but that very much speaks to equity metrics also, and we'll work through that person, but with all of you to think about how we do that. So hopefully that's helpful. I know it's not explicitly clear yet, but it's just kind of fuzzy right now for me too, but it's just changing, not hopefully, a drop off of staff support.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, so you'll see in the chat, we're kind of over time on this conversation. I'd hate to leave it sort of hanging without some effort to pull this together. And I think perhaps with Sue and Abby as well, and Indra, what I'm hearing is that folks really want to feel that this work is meaningful, and that we're helping create this systemic change that we all believe needs to happen, right? And so we need to navigate our capacity to do that. I think, Sarah, you said it very well. This committee won't be the ones doing the training probably, right? Or doing the this or doing the that. But this committee can make sure that when it comes time to budget for stuff, we've put these priorities forward that we think need to happen. Or when it comes time for people to feel accountable, that they can be accountable to you all as a committee, right? And where that's meeting once a quarter and the work happens in between, I'm not sure. But that's sort of what I'm hearing. And I welcome folks to maybe put something in the chat or something to help tie this together. And then I know there's an interest in going to public comment.
Yeah, and I don't want to say we're leaving it here. We're going to, I think, stop for public comment because we're trying to keep that on the calendar, the agenda when we say we're going to do it. And I think we will return to this for the last sort of 20 minutes to coalesce around, okay, what are we doing next? So I didn't want you to feel like we were being cut off, but I did want to acknowledge, I think we have some members of the public. So in case there are members of the public that want to make a comment on anything they've been hearing or thinking about in this conversation, please feel welcome to do so at this time.
Great.
Okay. I think that all I would do is say, David, I'm very happy and comfortable with you continuing to facilitate the conversation, but I want us to be really thoughtful about ending it in about 15, 20 minutes. Or am I wrong? Oh, no, we have a good half hour. We have a half hour. But I do want to put out there, again, I really I'm going to take a minute to say I appreciate all these comments. I especially appreciate, Jane, you're kind of clarifying that it's a transition. I think when we met a couple of weeks ago, it felt a little bit more like we're not going to be able to count on A&R. And I just want to say that both Abby and I have a lot of stress about our abilities to continue to lead. And frankly, neither of us have that time as it is. But I want to say that especially Sarah, you put out a lot of really good ideas, all of which, if we want those to be what happens, we have the opportunity to put budgets behind them and put them out for the council to endorse. Whether or not the council's endorsements get accepted by the governor, we don't know, but we've got to give that opportunity a try. So I just thought that might be a good thing for us to consider now. And I'll be quiet and go back to Chris, and I'll hand David the facilitation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Chris, go ahead, please.
Just brief on the capacity front. I don't remember if we talked about this last meeting or not, but folks should be aware that a number of the House appointees, I don't know how many, maybe Jane has a sense of it, but at least a few of us are asking not to be reappointed again. And so there's an opportunity in the JT world to reach out to the speaker to have people appointed to the council. So like I represented municipal interests, there's no reason in the world why somebody, who's kind of deep in the JT world in the municipal realm couldn't ask to be appointed, to fill the slot that I've been occupying. So I would just encourage people to do that. One note, though, I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back at all or anything, but I've actually tracked my total time on the council. Since I started, I'm approaching 500 hours now. And luckily, the London Regional Commission, I'm not compensated, specifically for this work, but they're willing to pay me to do this. So most people can't do that, but I think it is, to the extent that I've measured it, it is a measure of what's probably on the high end of what the commitment can be, at least early stage. We're developing a plan. I don't know how many other people have tracked hours, but it would probably be helpful to share that with Jane or others so that as people talk about, commitment, what does it take to be able to give them that kind of realistic perspective, so that way they don't jump in only to kind of be overwhelmed once they see what it really takes. Because there's a lot of work coming.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Chris, would you say that last year, though, was fundamentally different than this year in terms of the intensity of it?
Potentially, but I mean, it's also how many things, I serve on 2 different subcommittees, kind of got pulled into a third. I'm on the steering committee, I'm on the council, and now I'm on the transportation task group. So
yeah,
part of it was just kind of the depth of it, but I also think what I did that because not because I like punishment, but because it felt like the need was there to do the work. Yeah. And there's a lot of detailed work that's coming. So you're going to have people who can participate beyond just the meetings and participate in multiple subcommittees. I think. I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, it's not just me. There were a bunch of people doing this, and it's just something to think about it in the structure of the council and who gets appointed. About being realistic about what they can really give to it. Yeah. So But yeah, if you look at the subcommittee structures, and then that's the other issue too is, maybe I was part of the problem, too few voices being heard on too many different subcommittees. I may have framed that wrong, but I was also kind of asked to serve on these things too, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think everyone's extraordinarily grateful, Chris, I think is the bottom line there. So, Abby.
Yeah, so I'm kind of returning to like thinking about answering the question of like what our role is and how our meetings could be structured. And this is like, Sarah, you've like suggested something, and others have talked about this a little bit, that's like a complete role reversal of, instead of us going out, I think there's this piece around maybe us going out into the community to raise up the voices of marginalized and underserved communities piece that I think we still need to think about and talk about. But the other part of kind of being this advisory board or advisory subcommittee, that as work is being pushed up, like closer to implementation, as RFPs are developed, as rulemaking begins, as laws are drafted, that this subcommittee, given its important referenced in the Global Warming Solutions Act, is a gatekeeper. Like you have to present your ideas to this subcommittee and ensure, or at least a quorum of this subcommittee, to ensure that what you're proposing incorporates enough of the guiding principles to pass muster. And it sort of reminds me of like the Act 250 district commissioner model, which is you have all these appointed public community members that bring their public expertise, and any Act 250 development project in your community has to go before that board and make your case before your project can move forward. So it's a very much like turning the concept on its head, that people come to us. And so again, what I was kind of proposing in the chat was that our meeting schedule would be based upon how many applications or RFPs or draft things need to be reviewed, and there's presenters that come to us that kind of contact the co-chairs to be put on the next meeting agenda to share with us what they're proposing. And it's in a draft phase where we offer feedback and suggestions and do an evaluation of the just transition, application of what they're proposing. So I don't know, I'm sort of intrigued by this approach that feels to me like it utilizes the expertise of this subcommittee. It's achieving the kind of important role that this group was provided across the entire Climate Council scheme. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. And at the same time, you all as a group can proactively push things that also create that systemic change, whether it's the training, the systems, the metrics, whatever. You can be promoting those things as well. Kashka?
I like that idea a lot. I think that would be a great way for us to keep upholding the principles that were, that we initially came up with, and feel good about the work that we're doing. Again, instead of just feeling as if a box is being checked on some list. I really support that idea. I don't know if that's something that would be taken up by other committees, and if they would be willing to view us as that gatekeeper and pass things through us. So I think that's another thing to think about. But I do like this idea a lot.
Great. So I want to confirm, this sounds like we're coalescing around some ideas here about people coming to this subcommittee as a sort of standard practice of getting the review of you all suggesting specific things that you want to see happen in the budgeting process and other things. and also the participation in subcommittees, task groups, et cetera. All those ways, all of those things are ways to have an influence and get sort of new habits and systemic change happening. I wonder, just in the interest of time, do folks want to spend just a moment on the budgeting piece? Because Jane, if I understand it correctly, we actually need to have that ready by the September 11th council meeting, whenever that second week of September. And so we actually should put some ideas on the table today, and those can be refined by a smaller group later. But is that correct, Jane? Like that really, we need to have that on that agenda September 12th-ish kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay. So Sue, I don't know if your hand went up on that, but I'd be interested in testing that. I also need to leave at 1:15 to get to an in-person meeting I have at 6. So I don't want to truncate that conversation, but I'll probably turn that over to somebody else. Sue, your hand's up. Oh, hang on a second. You're not, there you go.
Sorry, and I know Kashka is up as well. I'd be happy to take facilitating role so you can get to your next meeting. I would just say, yeah, I was just kind of synthesizing some of the ideas that got put out there with the thought that maybe we brainstorm and put some ideas that we think are important based on what we just said, and maybe have a small group huddle to sort of put some numbers so that, and then we need to convene. I guess I thought I heard something was before October, but that's
No,
what
it's
maybe
been
goes
moved
to.
up. It's the problem.
All right, so I've heard establishing metrics for accountability. I've heard public engagement processes. I'm thinking of topics that need funding, compensation for participation, trainings, and this idea of us becoming a stop along the way. I kind of hesitate to think that anything would need approval, but certainly grading or evaluation from us, and especially how guiding principles are being integrated into whatever it is, policy, rule, whatever. So those are a number of things that I have just written down that need to, if we want them to happen, they need funding. And I'll put staffing this subcommittee as something that we want to see coming out. And it needs a person or some hours from a person clearly defined in a budget, or I don't know that it's going to happen. My 2 cents. Thanks.
That's great. Okay. So why don't we just drop those in the chat for a second? Let me just do that quickly, and folks can, Sue, did I get those right? The ones I just did in the chat. It's like, one is the establishing metrics, and there is a lot of money there already. So maybe money's not the thing there, but that's one thing. Compensation for participation. You guys have worked so hard to try to make that work, but maybe there's another way to make that work. Training for legislators and others. We've talked about that before. And capacity building for ourselves. Interesting, right? Staffing for the subcommittee. Indra, can you say one more word about the capacity building for this subcommittee?
Yeah, I hear some of us talk about wanting to do things, but I also hear the hesitation of, are we equipped to do that? So if there is an interest, I think it goes back to the comment that Kashka made earlier about what if we come with our own project idea and like we call us together, collaborate and design those projects. If that's what we are trying to do, then maybe there can be some capacity building just so that different members of the subcommittee could be running their own project while getting the support that they need.
Okay, great. Great. Okay. So
What else is needs, as we've been thinking about, not just today, but other things, maybe even on the sticky notes that need in our mind some funding, so we can at least put them on the table for consideration.
It's not just training for legislators. I just want to name, I have a high priority on my head is training for implementers, right? So members of the executive branch and then other agencies, quasi-state agencies that are responsible for implementing really need support.
nice.
And the service providers that those agencies fund.
Yeah, it trickles all the way down. It does, for sure.
Go ahead, Chris.
I wonder if there would be a few $1,000s to put towards like a research assistant to just put a comment in the chat about bringing examples to the council of JT work in other states, communities. So that just to kind of expand our resources, this would be to supplement our internal, within Vermont engagement. But sometimes it really helps to kind of see what other places are doing, especially when it comes to the actual like real world implementation. Maybe they're a little bit ahead of us.
Yeah.
I worry sometimes that Vermont exceptionalism kind of makes us not a little too insular. So anyway, didn't know if that might be a possibility, and maybe it's a graduate assistant that could help with that.
Okay, let's put it on there. I just saw translation. Thank you, Abby. What else? What else? So we can start with a list and then begin thinking about what does it cost? What does it look like?
So I also mentioned like advertising and marketing and branding. And I understand, that's already there somewhat, but again, for folks who are doing organic engagement and such and are willing to go out to different communities and get those community leaders involved, it would be nice to be able to come with materials and already prepared and not have to jump through hoops I just think it's silly not to have one and not to have that prepared already. So
Good. Yeah, I think whatever we think right now, let's put it on the chat and vocalize, because some of it, already maybe in Jane and others thinking, but let's keep it a toolkit. Kelly said a toolkit. That's good. An outreach toolkit that has the sort of lens of our committee in particular. Can you say that out loud, Abby? I see you in the chat. And David, whenever you need to hop off, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to need to jump very quickly.
Yeah, I don't know, but I can speak for my own agency, so I can imagine the case is true in others that we want to do more public engagement and we do not have the budget to pay for childcare, pay people for their time, provide food. And so I'm assuming that and maybe there is a budget for that as part of the public engagement, but if there isn't, I think that would be nice to be able to offer that for all the policy rulemaking and public engagement components.
It's not just nice, it's basically essential.
It's essential, yes.
And it's really hard to figure out because Jane and I have been trying to crack this nut. So let's put it in a budget and see what happens.
I mean, while we're making wishes, I love the idea that we would have some dollars that I'm sure we'd have to give, the state couldn't administer, we'd have to give to another agency to administer, that we could just tap for a variety of needs that come up. That if we said, we really think you ought to do this, and somebody said we don't have the funds to do that, we say, oh, we have this equity engagement pot of money, we can help you to support that. And next time you need to budget for it. So that we don't miss opportunities in the process. I think that could be interesting. I don't want to call it a slush fund. It wouldn't be that. It would have some specific purpose, but to do some of the things that Abby's like talking about.
And what's interesting, there's a major national, I think it's EPA has, and Carrie showed us a big potential grant opportunity to sort of do that. I don't think we're there yet, but anyway, maybe.
Maybe we could have our own grant program. We did that a long time ago at ANR. We gave out community climate change grants, and it was cool to actually like have something to directly engage with communities on, and they all had an education and outreach component.
I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. It was like almost like our own grant program that we can have some discussion over. And so we'd almost like want to give it to we'd want to give it to one of our trusted partners to administer for us, because it takes the state 18 months to get money out the door. But
like VCRD, Vermont Council on Rural Development could be that like kind of. In fact, they've got some mini grant opportunity right now. Good. I love these ideas. As we keep thinking about ideas, and I'm hoping, Sarah, you're capturing everything that's in the chat. Thank you. I do want to say we need to have a group of folks actually come together to try to put numbers behind these ideas. And we need this committee to come together before, what did you say, September when? Jane? Can you remind us the date?
Yeah,
12th.
it's the Monday after, there you go, it's the Monday after Labor Day. The 12th, yeah.
So that's in just a few weeks. Okay. So we would need to meet in 2 weeks. You said the 12th. Isn't Labor Day the 5th? So, okay, the Monday of Labor Day. Okay, so we could either, we just need to have this meeting come together, I think on the 8th, in order to provide something for the 12th. Would that be possible, Jane? Or? Yep. Okay.
Sue, what are you thinking? You're thinking this whole group needs to come together, or just a small, a small group could be delegated the task of putting some dollar signs to some of these strategies on behalf of the subcommittee?
Yes, but the subcommittee needs to meet to coalesce around a proposal for this next meeting of the actual council, which is on the 12th. So at our latest Thursday to do that would be September the 8th, which is 3 weeks from today.
I think you could delegate a small group to do that independent of the subcommittee if you wanted, I'll just say. Now that you have the list, knowing that what will happen now is you'll bring that list forward as sort of all of the ideas and the thoughts behind that at the September meeting. And then there'll be, once you know what the target is that you're shooting for, there'll be a chance to refine it later in September before the October meeting. It's really a chance for the council at the September meeting, in my mind, to see the full breadth of what's out there for priorities and to think then about a process to advance that for the October meeting. So I think you're okay with a small group between now and the September council meeting, and then having your September Just Transitions meeting focus on refinement.
What do others think? Do they want, is it okay to receive this information via email so that, and is that, I guess personally, I wouldn't want, I'm not sure if, do people feel comfortable delegating to a small group the idea of putting numbers to this and advancing it? That's the question. Or does anyone not feel comfortable with that? There's no question that's more likely to occur. We could do that and at least have some sort of a meeting on the 8th for anyone who wants to discuss it further.
So just for the record, that meeting on the 8th would be 1 week prior to our monthly meeting. So I think our monthly meeting is scheduled to be on the 15th of September. Which doesn't mean we can't change it if that feels important to people.
What feels important to people? Do you want to just delegate this? Go ahead, Kashka.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really important. I think that if we don't get a really concrete list of recommendations together and support them, so that the council can make those recommendations to the budget committee or whatever, I do think this is important, and I think the time is running out. So I think this is
it will
of
happen.
utmost importance.
I want to make sure, I think it'll happen. The question is, does everyone in this group feel like they want to reconvene to sort of bless the recommendations? Or do you feel like handing it off is okay?
Well, I don't
Right.
think it's just the recommendations though, Sue, isn't it? I mean, don't we have to have the proper support for those recommendations so that it's clearly understood why we're asking for this and the numbers?
Yes. And the question I'm asking is, do people want to allow a smaller group to do that on your behalf? Or do you want to have some gathering back together before the 12th? Kashka, sorry, Indra?
So will the smaller group be just putting the number behind each of the item, or will they also be prioritizing which are the priorities of just transition?
What do people want to do? I don't think we've talked about prioritization. I did hear from Jane that we would have the ability to more synthesize after. I guess, Jane, help me understand, what do you think that the council's going to adopt? A ballpark number, and then we get to figure out what to do with that number?
Yeah, this all is moving so fast now that I don't want to put too much clarity out there that I don't actually feel like I have yet. But the intent was for subcommittees to lift up a general suite of priorities at the September council meeting, and then hear from A&R, and then use that as a guide for what feels like A&R, I should say, and other relevant state agencies, and then put forward a target that subcommittees could work. I assume would go back to subcommittees to further refine between September and October. So I think not prioritizing your list at this point, but just working to have some ballpark figures associated with them would probably be all that's needed for September.
So it may be that your suggestion is the best way to go, that we keep this pretty high level and ballpark, see what the council is willing to do, and then use the next meeting, which will be the Thursday after the council meets, as the time to refine and prioritize. Okay. What do others think about that? I think that may be, because we have to meet between the September and the October meeting. So, okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Please speak if that does not feel appropriate. Sarah, you're saying, can you say what you're saying? Go ahead, Carrie has something to say, and then Sarah.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, I guess I am kind of concerned that if we don't work on this soon and we don't come up with specifics, like by the time we do, it might be too late, just knowing sometimes how the state budgeting process works. We don't get a lot of time always. So anyway, so I'd hate to see us like have all these ideas and then be like, oh, let's talk about it later. And then later is too late, or somebody's like, well, your proposal wasn't very well thought out, so we thought maybe next year. Just speaking from some experience.
That's my fear also.
Okay, well, I don't know that having an additional meeting of this group is going to make that better. It might be better to have not another meeting of this group and allow a task group to spend more time. Sarah, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarity. I think what I understand is that a small group would just take this list of things, put some budget numbers to it, sort of flesh out the ideas a little bit, so it's in a memo in front of the Climate Council. And I feel really confident saying small group do that, because we're giving you the list, and I just missed a couple of things Abby told me that I will add to the list, but that feels great to me. And I don't know that I can be in a meeting, but I certainly could weigh in on some emails and would be happy to, with, thoughts around dollars and costs or whatever.
Okay. I think we're going to go with that and not think that this is the final everything, but this was a way to advance these ideas, to put some numbers on them. That's what's being asked of us, and spend the next time we have together doing more of a job of synthesizing and prioritizing, to your important point, Indra, so that we can, the stuff that matters the most, we have the most oomph behind. And I think that'll be better for us to spend all our time together next. Please put your name in the chat if you want to be involved in that. And it looks like Carrie will. I would too like to be involved in that. And or if, like Sarah is saying, you want to at least be consulted through email, but you don't have time for a meeting. And it's 3 minutes to 6. I really appreciate everyone and your involvement tonight, both big picture and forward thinking and urgent action oriented work. I do think what we do is important, even though it feels like we're wallowing sometimes. and I think we're having an impact. Any comments from anyone else before we close out?
I do want to say that in the steering committee, there was public comment, and she was thrilled that we have now changed the public comment to basically include inside the minutes and inside the agenda instead of at the end. So her acknowledgement of that and her gratitude was really felt throughout the meeting. So it was just great. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, for all the good work you're doing outside of this meeting, but especially for being great participants in a meeting. We will stay in touch, both about the transportation stuff and about this budgeting stuff, and we're going to get some stuff in a big budget. Go ahead. Jane, were you trying to say something? Okay. Bye, everyone. It's the middle of August, so get out there and have some fun. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sue and Abby. Thank you.
Bye, you guys.